Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe, your friendly podcast for learning English while exploring important news from around the world. I am Adam, and today I am joined by my co-host, Julia. Julia, how are you today?
Hello, Adam. Hello, dear listeners. I am happy to be here with you. We have a thoughtful and educational episode today about a topic many people are discussing: Trump, Venezuela, and China. Are we entering a new Cold War? We will speak slowly and clearly, and we will explain new words so that beginner learners can follow along easily.
This topic matters because it connects three big subjects: a current U.S. president whose actions shape foreign policy, a country in Latin America with important natural resources and political tensions, and a global power that has been growing its economic and diplomatic influence. People worry about rivalry between big countries and whether that rivalry could look like the Cold War of the past, which was a long period of deep competition between two superpowers.
Yes, Adam. We will explain what a Cold War means in simple words, and then we will compare that idea with what is happening now between the United States and China, and how Venezuela fits into this story. We will avoid taking sides and focus on facts, simple explanations, and useful vocabulary, such as sanctions, influence, proxy, and geopolitical. For background on current concerns about US-China tensions and expert analysis, listeners can read thoughtful policy discussions from credible institutions that study these relationships.
Before we go further, dear listeners, we kindly ask you to like this video if you enjoy our episode and to subscribe to the English Globe so you do not miss future lessons that mix language learning with real-world topics. Please also write in the comments where you are listening from and share your opinion about today's topic. Simple sentences are fine, and your voice matters to other learners around the world.
Exactly. Writing in the comments is good English practice. Now, to help learners, we will speak clearly and explain key ideas step by step. First, we will define the historical Cold War and its main features like long-term rivalry, competing alliances, and indirect conflicts rather than direct large-scale war. Then we will look at present-day examples that people point to when they say a new Cold War might be forming, including competition over trade, technology, and influence in other countries.
We will also discuss how leadership and recent actions influence international reactions. For example, statements or policy moves by national leaders can change how countries react and create new tensions. There have been recent events and statements that increased attention to Venezuela and to tensions in the region, and such developments can shape broader perceptions of rivalry between major powers. We will keep our language simple and explain each term we use so beginners can learn vocabulary and practice comprehension.
Throughout the episode, we will introduce and explain important words. Sanctions means economic penalties one country uses to influence another. Influence refers to the power to affect decisions or actions, and proxy means supporting other groups or governments instead of direct action. We will repeat definitions in different ways so they become clear, and we will give short examples to show how these words appear in news reports and discussions.
As we continue, try to think about these questions. Why do major powers compete for influence in places like Venezuela? How can leadership choices increase or reduce tensions? And how do trade and technology shape modern rivalry? You can answer in the comments with simple sentences. Tell us what you think and where you are listening from.
By the end of this episode, you will understand basic reasons why some analysts talk about a new kind of Cold War, the role Venezuela plays in regional politics, and why China's global presence matters to the United States and to many countries around the world. We will not make strong predictions. Instead, we will explain ideas clearly so you can form your own opinion and practice English while doing so. For contemporary reporting about events involving Venezuela and US policy, reliable news outlets have the latest details and developments.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us today. Let us begin by defining the Cold War in simple terms and then move to how today's world is similar or different. Stay with us and listen carefully to the vocabulary and short explanations we give so your English improves while you learn about this important global topic. Donald Trump is the current President of the United States, and understanding his background is important for English learners because he has a long history as a businessman, television personality, and political figure, and these different roles helped shape his leadership style, his public communication method, and the choices he makes when dealing with international issues that influence global relationships in many important ways.
When we talk about President Trump's role in foreign policy, we explain it in neutral and simple English by saying that his approach focuses heavily on protecting national interests, renegotiating economic deals, and taking firm positions during international disagreements, and this direct style makes his decisions highly visible, easy to notice, and widely discussed in global media, which helps learners understand global news more clearly.
One major part of President Trump's foreign policy is the use of sanctions, which are economic tools that limit financial activities, restrict trade, or block certain transactions in order to encourage other governments to change specific behaviors, and this method is popular because it applies pressure without using military action, making it a key vocabulary term for anyone studying international politics in simple English.
Another important tool is the use of tariffs, and tariffs are special taxes placed on goods imported from other countries, making those products more expensive to buy and encouraging people to purchase locally produced items instead. And this method becomes relevant during trade disputes or economic strategies, helping English learners understand how countries protect industries or negotiate stronger economic positions.
Diplomacy, which means peaceful communication and negotiation between countries, also plays a major role in President Trump's international actions, even though his style of diplomacy can be more direct, faster, and sometimes more public than traditional diplomatic approaches. And studying this gives English learners a clear example of how communication styles can affect relationships, alliances, and global decision-making processes.
To understand President Trump's influence on the discussion about a possible new Cold War, we need to see how his administration interacts with major countries like China and resource-rich nations like Venezuela, because his decisions often include economic pressure, strong public statements, and strategic policies that aim to change the behavior of other governments while shaping how global powers respond to one another.
Our goal in this podcast is not to support or criticize any political leader, but to provide clear and educational explanatolons that help English learners understand vocabulary and ideas. And President Trump's actions offer helpful examples of terms related to economics, negotiation, diplomacy, international pressure, leadership decisions, and global competition, making him a relevant figure for language learning.
President Trump often emphasizes national interest, which means prioritizing the needs, goals, and economic strength of the United States above international commitments. And this idea influences how he handles trade agreements, military cooperation, and diplomatic communication, giving learners a simple and neutral example of how leaders choose different strategies to guide their country's position in global affairs.
Because President Trump's policies frequently lead to stronger economic competition, reorganized alliances, and new strategic tensions, many analysts study his decisions when discussing whether the world might be moving toward a new form of global rivalry, and understanding this helps English learners follow major news stories confidently while practicing long listening and reading skills.
For English learners, studying President Trump's role improves vocabulary related to international strategy, economic tools, negotiation methods, and political communication. And learning these concepts in slow and simple English helps listeners understand world events, read global news more effectively, and express their own ideas clearly in conversations, discussions, or classroom activities.
By learning these ideas step by step, learners understand why President Trump's leadership is repeatedly mentioned in discussions about U.S. foreign relations, especially with China and Venezuela, because choices made by his administration continue shaping global conversations, economic relationships, and diplomatic strategies, offering valuable topics for long-term English practice.
This completes our overview of who President Trump is and why his background matters in today's global context, and it prepares us for the next section where we will explore Venezuela's role in this complex story, why the country attracts so much international attention, and how its situation connects to larger global powers, all explained in slow and simple English for comfortable learning.
Venezuela is a country in South America that once had one of the strongest economies in the region because it possesses some of the world's largest oil reserves. But over the years, it experienced serious financial problems caused by falling oil prices, poor economic management, and political disagreements, which created a long crisis that affected daily life for millions of people and changed the way the nation interacts with the rest of the world.
To understand Venezuela's current situation, we need to recognize how its economy depended heavily on oil exports. And when global oil prices dropped sharply, the government lost a major source of income, leading to shortages of essential goods, rising poverty, and extremely high inflation, which is the rapid increase in prices that makes money lose its value and forces people to struggle with basic needs in their everyday lives.
This long period of inflation became so severe that many people described it as hyperinflation, meaning prices increased so quickly that salaries could not keep up, businesses struggled to survive, and families saw their savings disappear, which contributed to what experts call economic collapse, a situation where normal economic activity breaks down and people face great difficulty obtaining food, medicine, and other necessities.
As Venezuela's economy weakened, political tensions grew stronger between the government and opposition groups who disagreed about the country's direction, and these disagreements sometimes led to protests, international debates, and questions about leadership, making Venezuela a focus of global attention and creating opportunities for powerful countries like the United States and China to become more involved in different ways.
The United States became involved mainly for political and humanitarian reasons, as American leaders expressed concerns about democracy, human rights, and regional stability, and these concerns led to economic sanctions that restricted financial activities connected to certain Venezuelan officials, with the goal of encouraging political changes and supporting international efforts to improve conditions for the Venezuelan people.
China became involved for different reasons, especially because Venezuela's large oil reserves offered long-term economic opportunities, and China provided loans, investments, and infrastructure agreements in exchange for oil commitments, creating a relationship that allowed Venezuela to receive financial support and gave China greater influence in the region during a period when the United States and Venezuela were experiencing diplomatic tensions.
For English learners, this situation helps explain important vocabulary like oil reserves, which refers to large natural supplies of oil stored underground that countries extract and sell to earn money. And since Venezuela has one of the biggest reserves in the world, its economy became deeply connected to oil production, making the nation vulnerable to changes in global energy prices when markets shift unexpectedly.
Another key vocabulary term is inflation, which means the steady rise in prices that reduces the purchasing power of money. And in Venezuela's case, the inflation grew so rapidly that even basic items like bread, rice, or transportation became extremely expensive, affecting families, workers, and businesses in ways that made daily survival a difficult challenge for many people across the country.
We also introduced the term economic collapse, which describes a situation where normal economic systems fail because businesses close, currency loses value, and financial institutions struggle to function. And understanding this term helps learners explain why Venezuela's crisis has been so challenging, as it affected schools, hospitals, transportation, and other essential services that people depend on every day.
In addition to the economic difficulties, there are political tensions, a term that refers to disagreements, conflicts, or power struggles between different political groups. And in Venezuela, these tensions grew stronger as leaders debated how to fix the crisis, how to manage natural resources, and how to maintain stability, which attracted global attention because other countries often took different sides during these debates.
When powerful nations like the United States and China become involved in a country facing crisis, their actions often shape global discussions about influence, competition, and regional strategy. And Venezuela became an example of how global powers use diplomacy, economic tools, and long-term partnerships to protect their interests, making it an important topic for learners who want to understand international relations in simple English.
As we study Venezuela's story, we encourage English learners to focus on vocabulary, simple explanations, and clear ideas, because this topic helps build strong listening and comprehension skills. And understanding how Venezuela's crisis developed, how other countries became involved, and how key terms connect to global issues prepares listeners for the next section, where we explore China's wider role in shaping today's international landscape.
Today, we want to help you understand China's growing global influence in a clear and simple way, especially for English learners. China has become one of the world's biggest economies, and many countries pay close attention to its actions. When we say global influence, we mean how much a country can shape events, decisions, and relationships around the world through money, technology, trade, and diplomacy.
China's rise did not happen suddenly. For many years, China has built strong industries, exported goods to many nations, and invested in huge projects like roads, railways, ports, and energy systems. These projects are often part of China's global plan to connect more countries through trade and cooperation. This long-term plan helps China build relationships and increase its presence in different regions across the world.
One major reason China's influence is growing is because of its economic power. China produces many products that people use every day, and it also buys resources like oil, minerals, and food from other countries. When a country buys and sells a lot, it becomes important in the world economy. Countries that depend on China for trade are often careful about their political decisions because they want to keep their trade stable and secure.
Now let's connect this to Venezuela. Venezuela has some of the world's biggest oil reserves, and China has been investing in oil projects there for many years. China lends money, builds infrastructure, and offers financial support. This type of support is called a strategic partnership, which means two countries work together because it benefits both sides. Venezuela gains money and development, while China gets access to natural resources.
When we talk about economic cooperation, we mean countries helping each other through trade, investment, and shared projects. China uses economic cooperation to build stronger ties with many nations, not only Venezuela. It invests in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. These investments can include building bridges, airports, energy plants, and digital technology systems. All of these activities help increase China's visibility and long-term relationships around the world.
Some learners might wonder why China invests so widely. One reason is that China wants to expand its market and reach more consumers. Another reason is that long-term investment allows China to secure important resources. A third reason is political. When a country gives loans or builds major projects, it also builds influence. Countries receiving this support often work closely with China and may cooperate with its goals on the global stage.
It is also important to understand that China's influence does not only come from money. It also comes from diplomacy, technology, and culture. China builds diplomatic relationships by attending international meetings, offering development assistance, and signing agreements. China's technology companies operate in many countries, and Chinese cultural programs introduce language, art, and history to international students.
However, This increase in influence sometimes creates questions around the world. Some nations feel comfortable working with China, while others worry about becoming too dependent on Chinese money or technology. These concerns create discussions in global politics about balance, independence, and long-term partnerships. As English learners, it is useful to know that these relationships are complex and often involve economic interests, national goals, and political priorities.
The important thing to remember is that China's growing presence in places like Venezuela affects global conversations. It shapes decisions made by the United States, the European Union, and regional countries. When powerful nations interact in the same region, the relationships can become more competitive. This does not mean conflict, but it means countries watch each other carefully and respond strategically.
Today, we introduced vocabulary words like global influence, which means the power to affect international events, strategic partnership, which means cooperation between countries for long-term benefit, and economic cooperation, which means working together through trade and development. These terms help learners understand the relationships that shape global politics.
As we continue with our podcast, remember that this discussion is educational. We are not taking sides, and we are not giving political opinions. Our goal is to help you understand the world using simple English. China's growing influence is a major topic today, and learning about it helps you improve your vocabulary and understand international news more confidently. The United States has been paying close attention to China's growing influence because it affects many areas of international politics, global trade, and regional security. When the U.S. thinks about China's expansion, it often looks at how China invests in different countries, how it builds economic partnerships, and how it works with governments that are important for global energy and transportation routes. These observations help the U.S. understand how power is shifting across different parts of the world.
In global politics, countries often try to protect their own interests while avoiding unnecessary conflict, and this idea helps us understand the United States' approach to China. Many U.S. leaders talk about peaceful competition, meaning they want to compete in areas like technology, trade, and security without creating direct confrontation. Peaceful competition allows countries to disagree on some issues while still keeping communication open and reducing the chances of tension turning into something harmful.
The United States also follows something called foreign policy strategy, which is a long-term plan used to manage relationships with other countries. When the U.S. sees China increasing its influence in places like Asia, Africa, or Latin America, it studies how these changes might affect the balance of power. Balance of power means the level of strength each major country has in global affairs. If one country becomes too strong, others may try to adjust their strategies to maintain stability.
This brings us to a useful vocabulary term, geopolitical rivalry. This phrase describes a situation where two or more powerful countries watch each other's actions closely because their goals sometimes overlap. In the case of the United States and China, they both care about trade, security, new technology, transportation routes, and diplomatic relationships. A rivalry does not always mean hostility. It often means competition, different interests, and efforts from both sides to protect their influence.
When the U.S. responds to China's expansion, it often works with its partners and allies. In international politics, an ally is a friendly country that agrees to cooperate in areas like defense, security, technology, and trade. By strengthening alliances in Asia, Europe, and other regions, the United States tries to maintain a stable environment where countries can solve problems peacefully, keep trade flowing, and support each other during global challenges. Cooperation helps prevent misunderstandings that could cause unnecessary tension.
Another vocabulary term we want to teach today is regional power. A regional power is a country that has strong influence in a specific part of the world. China is considered a regional power in Asia because of its large economy, strong industries, and growing diplomatic ties. The United States is also deeply involved in Asia through trade, partnerships, and security agreements. When two major countries are active in the same region, they often create new policies to manage their interactions and prevent confusion.
The United States studies China's investments in places like Venezuela because these investments can shape the political and economic direction of the region. If China becomes more influential in areas traditionally connected to the U.S., it raises questions about future cooperation, access to markets, and long-term partnerships. This is not about taking sides. It is about understanding how big shifts in global politics can affect trade routes, energy supplies, and international decision-making.
Students of English should also learn the phrase national interest, which means the goals a country tries to protect for the well-being of its people. National interest can include economic growth, safety, international stability, and access to resources. When the United States responds to China's expansion, leaders think about their national interests and ask how different events might affect American workers, industries, security needs, and diplomatic relationships. Every country makes decisions based on its own national interest.
One important part of the U.S. response is communication. The United States often talks with China through official meetings, diplomatic channels, and international conferences. Even when countries disagree, communication helps them avoid misunderstandings and keep global systems functioning. These discussions can involve trade rules, environmental issues, technology standards, and regional security. Communication is a key tool for preventing unnecessary conflict and promoting peaceful cooperation.
Another part of the US strategy is working with international organizations that bring countries together to solve global problems. These organizations help nations share information, coordinate responses, and set rules that make international cooperation easier. When the US participates actively, it tries to shape global standards that support fairness, transparency, and stability. This also allows the US to work with countries that have different interests while maintaining respectful relationships.
When people talk about the United States and China, they sometimes imagine that all interactions must involve conflict, but that is not the full story. Many areas require cooperation, such as climate change, global health, scientific research, and economic stability. Cooperation reduces risks and allows countries to learn from each other. Even if competition exists, cooperation can help maintain global balance and prevent small disagreements from creating larger problems.
For English learners, today's discussion shows how global politics can be understood with simple vocabulary. Terms like geopolitical rivalry, regional power, and national interest describe the way countries act when their goals meet in the same areas. These ideas help learners understand world news more clearly, analyze international events more confidently, and build stronger knowledge of how global relationships work.
To begin, dear listeners, we need to understand what a Cold War means. Historically, the Cold War was a period after World War II when the United States and the Soviet Union were the two most powerful countries, and instead of fighting directly with armies, they competed in many other ways, including arms races, space exploration, economic influence, and diplomatic partnerships. And this term helps us describe long-term strategic rivalry between countries without direct large-scale warfare.
Yes, Adam. During the Cold War, both countries had different political systems and ideologies. The United States supported democratic governments and market economies, while the Soviet Union supported communist governments and state-controlled economies. They competed to influence other countries, gain allies, and increase global power. And this period lasted several decades, affecting politics, trade, science, and culture around the world, which is why it remains an important example for learners today.
Now, when we ask whether the United States and China are entering a new Cold War, we are thinking about whether a similar type of long-term strategic competition is forming, but it is important to notice differences. China is not the Soviet Union. The world is more connected through trade and technology, and military conflict is not currently direct, while economic competition, diplomatic influence, and technological innovation are some areas where tensions can appear, helping us study global affairs in clear and simple English.
A key term here is strategic competition, which means two countries compete to gain advantages in long-term plans related to economy, technology, defense, and international partnerships, without necessarily engaging in war. The United States and China both have strategic goals that sometimes overlap, sometimes conflict. And understanding this phrase helps English learners describe the way countries act when they aim to protect interests and gain influence in the global arena.
Another important concept is ideological differences, which means differences in the beliefs and values that guide how countries are governed, make decisions, and interact with citizens and other nations. For example, the United States emphasizes democratic systems and free markets, while China emphasizes centralized government control and economic planning, and these differences can shape global discussions, partnerships, and sometimes tensions, without resulting in direct military conflict.
Comparing today's situation to the old Cold War, there are similarities, such as competition for influence in other countries, economic rivalry, and leadership positioning in regions like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. There are also differences, because the modern world is more interconnected through trade, global communication, and technology, which means countries cannot isolate themselves completely, and cooperation is often necessary even during competitive times, offering a unique example for learners.
For instance, the United States and China cooperate in trade, international health issues, climate agreements, and science research, while competing in areas like technology, energy resources, and regional influence. This mix of competition and cooperation shows that a new Cold War may not look exactly like the historical one. English learners can notice how words like cooperation, competition, and influence are used to describe global relationships in real-world contexts.
It is also important for learners to understand that phrases like strategic competition and ideological differences are not political opinions. Instead, they are descriptive terms that explain why countries sometimes act differently, why tensions appear, and why policies may focus on protecting national interests. Using these phrases helps learners discuss global issues in English without expressing support or criticism of any government.
During this episode, we can see that identifying similarities and differences between the historical Cold War and today's U.S.-China relationship helps learners build analytical skills. We examine economic strategies, diplomatic efforts, and technological races while keeping language simple. By using real-world examples and neutral explanations, students improve listening comprehension and expand vocabulary with phrases that appear often in news articles and educational content.
Finally, understanding the potential for a new Cold War helps learners recognize patterns in international affairs. Words like strategic competition, ideological differences, global influence, and diplomatic strategy allow students to describe actions by countries clearly. By studying these concepts, learners not only improve English, but also develop a deeper awareness of how world powers interact, making it easier to follow news, discuss events, and express informed opinions in simple English.
Venezuela is very important in global discussions because of several reasons, including its massive oil reserves, which are some of the largest in the world. Oil is a key energy source for many countries, and controlling or accessing it can affect global energy prices. Geography also matters because Venezuela is located in a strategic region of South America, close to trade routes and neighboring countries, which makes it an important partner or competitor in economic and political relationships.
Yes, Adam. Another reason Venezuela is significant is that countries like the United States and China consider partnerships carefully. When nations form partnerships, They often look for access to resources like oil, natural gas, and minerals. And they also focus on regional security, meaning stability in neighboring countries to avoid conflicts, protect trade routes, and maintain influence in areas that are strategically important for economic and political reasons.
Venezuela's oil reserves create what we can call energy security for countries that depend on imported oil. Energy security means a nation can reliably access the energy it needs for industry, transportation, and daily life. Countries that cannot access energy easily face high costs, economic difficulties, or even social problems. Because Venezuela has so much oil, it automatically becomes a focus for nations wanting stable energy supplies to support their economies and citizens.
Another key factor is regional influence, which describes how one country can affect the politics, economics, and security of neighboring nations. Venezuela has influence in South America because its decisions about trade, alliances, and political alignment can affect nearby countries. This influence can be used for partnerships, negotiations, or strategic positioning, and understanding this term helps English learners see why Venezuela is not just important for itself, but also for the entire region.
Economic leverage is also a critical concept. Economic leverage means using financial resources, trade opportunities, or investments to influence the behavior of other countries. Venezuela's oil, combined with financial relationships with nations like China, gives it economic leverage. Countries that want to maintain influence or access resources must consider Venezuela's position, making it a central topic in discussions about U.S.-China competition and global strategic planning.
The partnerships countries form are often long-term. Nations like China invest in infrastructure, energy projects, and loans to Venezuela because they gain reliable access to oil and increase their influence in the region. The United States, on the other hand, focuses on diplomatic relationships, sanctions, and humanitarian programs to maintain influence while promoting stability and protecting its interests. These contrasting approaches show how Venezuela becomes a central point of global strategy and learning vocabulary.
Venezuela's political situation also affects why it matters globally. Political instability can increase risks for international trade, foreign investment, and diplomatic efforts. When countries assess these risks, they think about protecting citizens, maintaining supply chains, and strengthening alliances. For English learners, studying this example helps explain how economic resources, geography, and politics intersect to influence strategic decisions in clear and understandable language.
Energy, geography, and political alliances together make Venezuela a key player in discussions about geopolitical competition. Geopolitical competition refers to the rivalry between countries over territory, resources, or influence in strategic locations. Venezuela's position and resources attract attention because major powers are interested in shaping outcomes that benefit their national interest and regional strategies, making it a perfect case to learn vocabulary and concepts used in global news.
It is important for learners to notice that Venezuela's role in global tension is not about taking sides. Instead, it is about understanding patterns. Countries form partnerships to secure energy, protect trade routes, and increase regional influence. Venezuela provides a clear example because its oil, strategic location, and political alliances create multiple layers of interaction, showing how decisions in one country can have far-reaching consequences for global politics and economics.
By studying Venezuela in this way, learners can expand vocabulary, such as energy security, regional influence, and economic leverage. These words help explain why countries act strategically when forming partnerships and making decisions. Understanding these terms allows students to follow international news, analyze global trends, and discuss complex situations in English confidently, while using simple, clear, and accurate language, suitable for beginners and intermediate learners.
Finally, Venezuela's significance helps us understand the larger picture of global competition between the United States and China. By examining oil reserves, regional influence, and economic leverage, we see how resources and geography shape global strategies. This understanding provides English learners with a practical example of global politics, allowing them to connect vocabulary, concepts, and real-world events in a way that improves both language skills and comprehension of international affairs. In international politics, leadership changes can have a major impact on global relations because each president, prime minister, or leader brings new ideas, priorities, and strategies to their government. In the United States, for example, a new president can decide to continue previous policies, modify them slightly, or completely introduce new approaches, which is called a policy shift. And understanding this concept is very helpful for English learners who want to follow international news more easily.
Exactly, Adam. The term administration refers to the team of leaders, officials, and advisors who work with a country's head of state to implement policies. When a new US administration comes to power, its goals and methods may differ from the previous one, affecting relationships with countries like China and Venezuela. Learners can see how leadership changes influence global decisions, trade, diplomacy, and security, which makes it important to understand the roles of leaders in international affairs.
For example, some US presidents prioritize diplomacy and international cooperation, working closely with allies and multilateral organizations, while others may focus on national interest, economic independence, or military strength. These choices shape how the US interacts with China, Venezuela, and other nations. By observing these differences, learners can understand why foreign policy changes over time and how these changes affect diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and global strategies in simple English terms.
Similarly, leadership changes in China influence international interactions, even though the structure is different from the United States. Chinese leaders often set long-term goals for economic growth, technological development, and global partnerships. Their decisions affect investments in countries like Venezuela, their participation in trade agreements, and their engagement with the United States and other global powers. Studying these patterns helps English learners recognize how leadership shapes policy, influence, and negotiations worldwide.
Venezuela is also affected by leadership. When a new government or president takes power, policies on oil, international relations, and domestic stability may change. These shifts can directly influence diplomatic relations with major countries like the United States and China. By understanding this, learners see how leaders' decisions at a national level can have ripple effects in global politics, trade, and security, offering practical examples to connect vocabulary with real-world events in English.
Another important term is diplomatic relations, which refers to the formal relationships countries maintain through communication, agreements, and collaboration. Diplomatic relations can be strengthened or weakened depending on leadership priorities. A new administration may choose to negotiate trade deals, sign alliances, or participate in regional organizations, while another may emphasize sanctions, economic pressure, or strategic competition. Learners can practice using this vocabulary in context to describe global events accurately.
A good example of a policy shift is when a president changes the approach to economic sanctions or trade agreements. One administration may increase sanctions on a country like Venezuela to influence government decisions, while another may reduce sanctions to encourage negotiation. Similarly, China may adjust its investment strategy in Venezuela depending on leadership priorities, which changes the balance of power and global economic relationships. Observing these patterns helps learners follow international news clearly.
Leadership also affects alliances and regional influence. Countries often form partnerships based on shared goals, mutual benefit, and trust in leadership. When leaders change, these relationships may strengthen, weaken, or change direction. For example, a US president focusing on Asia may work to strengthen alliances with Japan and South Korea, which indirectly influences China's strategy. Venezuela may seek closer ties with countries that provide economic support, demonstrating how leadership shapes regional influence.
Studying these leadership effects helps learners understand that global politics is not fixed. It changes with administrations and leaders. A single policy decision can affect trade, energy, security, and international cooperation. Vocabulary like administration, policy shift, and diplomatic relations becomes easier to remember when learners see them in real examples. This approach allows students to analyze news, discuss international events, and express opinions in English more confidently.
Finally, understanding leadership changes teaches English learners that international relations involve planning, negotiation, and adaptation. Leaders make decisions based on national interest, regional stability, and global influence. Observing how different administrations in the United States, China, and Venezuela respond to global challenges helps students understand the causes and effects of policy changes while improving comprehension and vocabulary in English.
By connecting leadership with global outcomes, learners can see the dynamic nature of international affairs. Leaders' priorities, policy shifts, and diplomatic strategies shape economic agreements, regional influence, and global security. This knowledge not only improves English skills, but also provides context for interpreting news stories, analyzing world events, and discussing complex topics in a clear and understandable way, which is essential for anyone interested in international relations and language learning.
In conclusion, leadership changes are a major factor in global politics because every president, prime minister, or national leader brings new priorities, strategies, and approaches. Learning terms like administration, policy shift, and diplomatic relations through examples of the United States, China, and Venezuela allows learners to connect vocabulary with real-world scenarios, improving comprehension, critical thinking, and English proficiency at the same time.
Global stability is a term that describes a situation where countries interact in a way that avoids large conflicts, protects trade, and supports international rules. Stability allows nations to cooperate, make agreements, and prevent crises that could harm citizens and economies. When discussing the United States, China, and Venezuela, global stability depends on how these countries manage competition, diplomacy, and shared interests, which makes it an important topic for learners to understand in simple English.
Yes, Adam. Global stability affects everyone, not only leaders and governments. Ordinary people experience its effects through jobs, prices, and access to resources like energy and food. For example, if countries cooperate to maintain stable oil prices, citizens pay reasonable amounts for transportation and goods. If tensions rise, markets can become uncertain, creating economic difficulties. Understanding these connections helps English learners see why international relationships matter in everyday life.
One possible outcome is increased cooperation between nations. Cooperation occurs when countries work together to solve shared problems, such as climate change, trade agreements, and energy security. Cooperation promotes peace, prevents misunderstandings, and allows countries to focus on development instead of conflict. In the case of the United States, China, and Venezuela, cooperation could mean negotiating energy deals, improving trade, and supporting regional stability, which has a positive impact on global security.
Another outcome is competition, which is when countries try to gain advantages over one another without necessarily creating conflict. Strategic competition can happen in technology, trade, or regional influence. This type of competition encourages innovation, growth, and efficiency, but can also increase tensions if countries feel their interests are threatened. English learners should understand that competition does not always lead to war, but is a key part of global interactions and strategic planning.
Tension is the third possible outcome, and it arises when disagreements between countries intensify without effective solutions. Tension can affect trade, energy prices, and security measures, and may lead to uncertainty in international markets. When the United States and China compete for influence in countries like Venezuela, the world watches carefully because small disagreements can create economic or political ripple effects. Understanding tension helps learners see how decisions at the national level affect global stability.
A key term here is global security, which means protecting nations, citizens, and international systems from conflict, threats, and instability. Global security involves cooperation on issues like military safety, border protection, and international law enforcement. It also includes economic and environmental stability because insecurity in one area can affect others. Learning this term helps English learners describe worldwide challenges and understand why countries act to prevent large-scale problems.
Another term is economic impact, which refers to how political decisions, conflicts, or cooperation affect businesses, jobs, trade, and prices. For example, decisions by the United States or China regarding sanctions, investments, or trade agreements can change oil prices, currency value, and supply chains around the world. Venezuelans, Americans, and citizens in other countries can experience these effects in daily life, which makes economic impact an essential concept for learners studying international affairs in English.
International cooperation is another important term, meaning countries working together to solve problems, improve trade, or maintain peace. This type of cooperation helps create stability in regions affected by political or economic tensions. When nations collaborate, they can manage natural resources, respond to crises, and share technology, which reduces risks and ensures better outcomes for citizens everywhere. Learners can use this term to describe real-world events and understand how countries interact positively.
Global stability is influenced by leadership, policy choices, and relationships between nations. Each country makes decisions to protect its national interest, ensure energy security, and maintain influence. When countries consider cooperation, competition, or tension, these decisions shape world events, trade, and security. By studying these outcomes, English learners understand not only global affairs, but also the language needed to explain cause and effect relationships in international politics.
The practical effects of global stability also include economic growth, access to resources, and everyday safety. Citizens in any country benefit when nations collaborate on trade, security, and environmental protection. When countries fail to cooperate or tensions rise, ordinary people may face higher prices, fewer jobs, or disruptions in essential services. Recognizing these connections helps learners link global news with daily life, making English learning more meaningful and applicable.
Studying global stability allows learners to connect terms like global security, economic impact, and international cooperation with real-world examples. It also helps understand how leadership, alliances, and strategic decisions interact to influence outcomes. By observing the effects of cooperation, competition, and tension, students develop stronger comprehension skills, critical thinking, and vocabulary to discuss complex topics clearly, which is essential for English learners interested in global affairs.
Finally, global stability is not a fixed concept. It evolves with leadership changes, economic shifts, and international events. By analyzing possible outcomes, learners can predict trends, understand risks, and explain international developments in simple English. This knowledge builds confidence, allows learners to discuss global affairs accurately, and improves their ability to follow news about the United States, China, Venezuela, and the world, making English learning practical and engaging.
Dear listeners, in this final section, we will reflect on what English learners can take away from studying global politics. Understanding international relations, like the interactions between the United States, China, and Venezuela, offers more than knowledge about countries. It also provides a rich opportunity to practice English. By analyzing news, discussions, and global events, learners can improve vocabulary, comprehension, and critical thinking simultaneously in a real-world context.
Yes, Adam. Global politics introduces learners to specific terminology that is very useful for English comprehension, such as strategic competition, economic leverage, diplomatic relations, and policy shift. By seeing how these words are used in context, students can remember them more easily than by learning lists of words. It also shows learners how English is applied in practical situations, including news articles, podcasts, and discussions about current events.
Another lesson is the importance of connecting language with ideas. Learning English is not only about memorizing grammar rules or vocabulary, it is about understanding meaning, analyzing information, and expressing opinions clearly. By discussing topics like U.S.-China relations or Venezuela's role in the global economy, learners practice connecting words with real concepts, which strengthens comprehension and builds the ability to talk about complex topics in simple, accurate English.
This podcast also demonstrates the value of listening carefully. When you follow long conversations like ours, you hear words repeated in natural context, understand sentence structures, and recognize how vocabulary is used in real-world explanations. Listening practice like this improves pronunciation, comprehension, and confidence, especially when learners focus on phrases such as global security, energy cooperation, and regional influence, which appear frequently in discussions about international affairs.
Reading and writing about global events can also enhance English skills. Students can summarize news stories, write short opinions, or answer comprehension questions about leadership, diplomacy, or global stability. For example, explaining why Venezuela is important in world politics, or describing strategic competition between the United States and China, gives learners practical exercises that combine vocabulary, grammar, and reasoning in a meaningful way. Dear listeners, now that we have explored today's topic about the United States, China, Venezuela, and the possibility of a new Cold War, it is a good moment to summarize the key ideas in simple English so that everyone can remember and practice the vocabulary. We discussed Donald Trump and his role as the current President of the United States, his approach to foreign policy, and how leadership changes influence global decisions, which helps learners understand political concepts clearly.
Yes, Adam. We also talked about Venezuela and why it is important in global politics because of its oil reserves, geography, and strategic alliances. Understanding terms like energy security, regional influence, and economic leverage helps learners describe why countries form partnerships and take certain actions to protect resources and maintain stability. These terms are not difficult if we see real examples of how countries act and interact in the world.
We discussed China's growing global influence and its investments in countries like Venezuela, which shows how nations work to increase their global influence, strategic partnerships, and economic cooperation. Learners can see that economic actions, trade agreements, and investments are tools that countries use to gain advantages in the international arena. And these words appear often in news articles, reports, and discussions about world politics, making them useful vocabulary for English learners.
Another important idea we explored was the United States' response to China's expansion, including concepts like geopolitical rivalry, regional power, and national interest. By understanding these terms, students can see why countries make certain decisions, how competition shapes global policies, and why diplomacy is important to prevent conflict. These words help learners describe global events accurately and confidently in simple English.
We also compared the historical Cold War with today's situation between the United States and China. We explained strategic competition and ideological differences, showing how countries compete in long-term plans while following different political or economic systems. Learners can see that global competition does not always lead to war. Instead, it can involve trade, technology, and regional influence, and understanding these words makes international news easier to follow.
Venezuela's role in global tension taught us how resources, geography, and alliances create influence in world politics. By learning terms like energy security, economic leverage, and regional influence, students can describe why countries pay attention to strategic locations and valuable resources. These examples help learners connect vocabulary with real situations, improving comprehension and making it easier to discuss world events in English confidently.
Leadership changes in the United States, China, and Venezuela affect foreign policy, diplomacy, and global cooperation. Terms like administration, policy shift, and diplomatic relations show learners how decisions by leaders influence trade, alliances, and regional security. Observing these patterns helps students connect vocabulary with actions, making it easier to explain complex ideas in simple English without losing meaning or context.
We also examined what this all means for global stability, using terms like global security, economic impact, and international cooperation. Learners can understand that cooperation, competition, or tension between countries affects ordinary people, world markets, and energy access. These concepts connect real-world outcomes with English vocabulary, making it possible to follow international news, participate in discussions, and improve comprehension while learning practical terms used by journalists and analysts.
Now, let us give our listeners a short comprehension practice. First question: why is Venezuela considered important in global politics? Second question: what is meant by strategic competition? Third question: how can leadership changes affect international relationships? Listeners can answer these questions in the comments, which allows them to practice English writing and reinforce understanding of today's lesson.
Here is another question. What is energy security, and why do countries care about it? Next, describe the difference between cooperation and competition in global politics. Finally, explain in your own words how diplomatic relations help countries solve problems without conflict. These questions are simple but allow learners to think critically and use new vocabulary, improving both comprehension and confidence in English.
Before we finish, let us share a motivational message for English learners. Remember that learning English is not only about grammar or vocabulary, it is about understanding ideas, connecting them to real-life situations, and using language to explore the world. Every time you listen, read, or write, you are building a bridge between words and understanding, which strengthens both your skills and your confidence.
Yes, Adam. Every day you practice English, you expand your ability to see the world clearly, analyze global events, and express your thoughts with precision. Even if progress feels slow, each word learned, each sentence understood, and each concept connected brings you closer to fluency. Keep exploring, asking questions, and applying what you learn in daily life, because this is the path to becoming confident, thoughtful, and skilled in English.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this educational journey today. Remember to practice the new vocabulary, think about global issues, and try answering the comprehension questions in the comments. Your participation is valuable, and each effort you make in English brings you closer to understanding the world while improving your language skills.
Absolutely, Adam. Keep listening, keep practicing, and keep connecting words to real-life situations. Language learning is a continuous journey, and every step you take builds understanding, clarity, and confidence. We hope today's episode gives you new ideas, useful vocabulary, and the motivation to explore English while learning about the world around you. Stay curious and continue your journey with enthusiasm and patience.